This week will start us on the topic of putting together an organized and well-supported argument. This is the last topic that we will explore this semester because the task of putting together a strong argument will require you to draw on all of the different material that we have covered over the course of this semester. So just think of this as like the big capstone. We're trying to put together the big project that we've been leading up to here. So let's get the ball rolling with a prompt. I don't want you to feel intimidated, so let's start out small here. Alright, let's consider your response to that prompt. Did you say that the opinion should come before the source searching? Well, I have some surprising news for you. The first lesson that I would like to impart this week is that most writers make mistakes from the very beginning of the process of formulating an argument. Most writers go about everything in a completely backwards order, even though it might not seem that way to you. Here's how it usually goes. The writer thinks about something that he or she feels strongly about, which is fine. But the mistake that is too often made is that the writer assumes that they should start with their opinion and then go back to find sources to support that argument. I can understand why writers do it that way. They feel like it gives the research some additional guidance, and they're probably also thinking, well, how should I know what sources to go get until I've picked my stance on the topic, right? It's a reasonable question, but it's still a mistake because this kind of approach leads to biased, incomplete, and poorly supported arguments. Since the writer goes into the argument with presuppositions or preconceived notions or viewpoints about their topic, he or she is unlikely to observe many of the important alternate viewpoints or related issues and topics that need to be addressed in order to write intelligently about the topic. So by choosing a stance first and then going to find research just to support that stance, the writer has completely overlooked the number one most important part of the process of putting together a strong argument: the research. In fact, a good formal argument needs to go back even farther than gathering sources, and it needs to go back even farther than choosing a stance. Before you do either of those, you need to first identify problems. Now let me explain that idea of identifying problems. We don't want to go into any topic with too many assumptions, like I said, but it is a good idea to look at situations or general topics and try to observe some of the surrounding issues that tie into that situation or topic. Now, if that explanation still isn't turning on a light bulb for you or making anything more clear, I'm certain that this next experiment we're going to do will make that more understandable. So at this time, I'm going to ask you to complete an exercise for me. I'm going to have you do some things on your honor here, since I can't physically be there with you as you complete this task, but I can tell you it's going to be helpful in making you understand how to research by first identifying problems. So what I'm going to ask you to do is look at some images and take 2 minutes on each of them to journal as many problems with what you see in the image as you possibly can. So I don't want to say any more than that for fear of spoiling anything else about this exercise, but I'll just ask you at this time to pause this video to search for and open a Word document that I have provided for you this week. It's titled Identifying Problems Practice. So go ahead and open that. Got it? Okay, now just be sure that when you open it, you don't scroll down past the first picture until you've taken 2 minutes to list out the problems that you see in it. So there will be several pictures. There's one on each page of the document, and it's important that you wait to look at these pictures one at a time as you journal. So look at one picture, take 2 minutes to journal. Once you've done that, look at the next image, take 2 minutes to journal, etc. So, all right, I release you to your task. I imagine that you were probably able to find a whole slew of problems with the images that I presented to you. I recommend that when it comes to starting your researched argument, you take the same approach you took in this exercise. Instead of coming into the writing part of this project with presuppositions and set beliefs or opinions about your topic, first, just try to identify some problems that you see in the world or in society around you. Don't even worry about what might be the cause of those problems yet. Just observe. That's how a truly great researcher starts, with a truly open mind. And that's what I recommend for you as well. Doing some observation will also make it more likely that you will find a topic that you enjoy instead of something cookie cutter and dull that doesn't genuinely interest you, or something vague like gun control or abortion, or those kind of topics that you see everybody pick just because they think, oh, I've got to write a research paper, I need to pick one of these generic topics. So once you've identified your problem, you've taken the first step. Many writers who manage to effectively identify a problem still stumble when it comes to the next, also important part of the process. And that is to always consult sources before forming a thesis and let them guide your thesis. Let them help you decide what your thesis should be. You want to do it this way for the same reason that I explained with the previous note. If you come into your topic with a preconceived thesis, you're likely to overlook important alternate perspectives that should be included in your research. So remember, after all, what we talked about early in the semester. Arguing should be about seeking out truth instead of winning. You'll be more likely to find that truth if you go into your research without having formed an opinion already. So just identify the problem, and that by identifying your problem, it's going to give you your topic, and then conduct research on that topic, and hopefully that research is going to give you your thesis statement. And in the end, that approach will create a more informed and powerful argument for you. At this point, let's assume that we have effectively identified a problem without making any assumptions about it. And then let's assume that we took the next step and gathered plenty of different sources on that topic to educate ourselves more about it. You're still not out of the woods yet, because especially in our society today, with such easy access to the internet and hastily published information and social media, the rumor mill is churning faster than ever, and we need to be careful about ensuring that we have compiled strong sources. I have a prompt that I'd like you to complete for this third step of the process that we're discussing this week. You won't need to write in response to this one. I just want you to see what comes to mind for you immediately. So just think about this one. The prompt is, what sources do you go to for your everyday information? CNN, the Jon Stewart Show, USA Today, Time Magazine, etc. So just what sources do you get your information from? How much trust do you have in those sources? And what are some common sources that you do not trust? Take a moment to think about that. The important point I want to stress here is that no matter what your response might be, even if you said, you know what, I don't read newspapers or watch the news or anything, you probably still check the internet occasionally at least. But what I want to stress is that no matter what your response might be, it is still important to do some digging of your own to cross-check and confirm that your sources are strong. I want to do a little activity here so that you can get a feel for what I'm saying about this, because it really is easy to find misinformation in sources. I'm going to display some different potential sources of information, and I want you to rate these potential sources of information just like you rated your own in the previous prompt. So just look at the different sources I'm going to show you and consider how much faith and credibility would you credit these with. Example 1. Political commentary from Stephen Colbert on his TV show, The Colbert Report. Example 2. Statistics about a particular player, a particular Hall of Fame player, that was published in a book titled Cooperstown Hall of Fame Players. This book was published by the Baseball Hall of Fame Museum itself. Here you can see the player is Ty Cobb, and it's got his statistics down here. Example 3. A report of an event from the New York Times newspaper. This article is, well, this is an old one, about an issue that happened toward the beginning of Abraham Lincoln's presidency. Example 4. An article from a topic on a Wikipedia website page. This one's about manatees. Interesting. Example 5. A book about economics published by a major publishing house and written by Steve Forbes, an economist himself. And it even says here, Steve Forbes is chairman, CEO, and editor-in-chief at Forbes Media and an internationally respected authority in the worlds of economics, finance, and corporate leadership. Example 6. Another book on economics, also published by a major publishing house and written by Michael Harrington, who has credentials very similar to Steve Forbes and who is the author of 16 books on similar topics. Which sources did you rate highest and lowest? Let's go through each of them together to learn a bit more about each of these sources. I have some information for you that I really think you are going to find surprising. Let's look at our first example source, Stephen Colbert. Now, if you watch the Colbert Report, you may or may not be aware that Stephen Colbert isn't actually a reporter, even though he depicts himself as one in this, in his TV show, The Colbert Report. He's a comedian. He makes jokes of current issues, especially regarding politics. But his information is not credible because it's intended as comedic commentary. So this is just one example of a source that would not be considered credible, but is in fact often referred to in popular culture. Our second example, I bet you were thinking, is a lot more reliable, because here we have statistics about a baseball player published by none other than the Baseball Hall of Fame itself. What I think you may be surprised to find is that the statistics are actually wrong. It has been found in recent years that those numbers about that particular player, and several other players in fact, are actually inaccurate. And not just one or two, many of that player's statistics were actually found to be wrong because of miscalculations that have been done over the years of that player's career. So even here, we have a very good source making a mistake. But surely, in example 3, the New York Times, one of the oldest and most well-respected newspapers in America, is going to be a more credible source, correct? Well, in this example that I provided you, you'll actually find a little footnote that I have that goes along with that document, and it points out that the Times correspondent who wrote that article, a New York Times writer, wrote an inaccurate report of what happened right here, and that's widely acknowledged today. So here again, we've got a source that is credible, but still has made an error. That fourth example, an article from Wikipedia, that is a website that is notorious for having bad information. I would not recommend, or I do not cite Wikipedia. Let me just say it. Don't do it. Because anybody can post on that website and it can contain any kind of material. It's an open source website. What I do recommend, though, if you're going to look at a website like that, you'll at least find if you scroll down to the bottom of their pages, they do have little sources listed for different pieces of information that's published on the web page. Maybe use Wikipedia as something like a Google search, where you go down to the bottom and dig a little deeper and see where those sources take you. But don't cite Wikipedia itself, because you can't be sure of what's on there. What I find interesting about examples 5 and 6 are that both of these men are highly credentialed, and they're writing about a topic that they have they both have extensive experience in. But here's the interesting thing. The books that they've written take entirely opposing views on what is smart economic policy. So you'll find that even among very credible, intelligent people, there are still differing viewpoints and disagreements. So the moral of the story here is that you should always check your sources, because all sources are going to be created by humans. And you know what? Humans just make mistakes. So although there definitely are sources that are credible, all sources are also subject to human error. So I would recommend not just taking everything you read at your word. Like the saying goes, you don't listen to everything you read. So just make sure to be very careful when you're using your sources that the information in it is accurate.